The morning sun cast long shadows across the remote military outpost as Staff Sergeant Sarah Chun finished her final equipment check. The base, nestled in a valley surrounded by towering mountains, had been her home for the past 8 months. Today was supposed to be different. Today, her unit was scheduled to evacuate, leaving the isolated position forever. Sarah had volunteered to stay behind for the final sweep, ensuring no sensitive equipment or classified materials remained. It was a routine assignment, or so everyone thought. The rest of her company had departed in convoy 3 hours earlier, their vehicles disappearing into the mountain pass like ghosts fading into mist. The outpost felt eerily quiet without the usual bustle of 60 soldiers going about their daily routines. Sarah moved methodically through each building, her boots echoing in the empty corridors. She had always been thorough, a trait that earned her respect among the ranks. Her fellow soldiers trusted her judgment, and her superiors relied on her attention to detail. As she worked, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The evacuation had been rushed, orders coming down from command just 48 hours earlier. Intelligence reports suggested enemy movement in the region, but nothing concrete enough to warrant immediate concern. Still, the timing felt off. The base's communication equipment crackled to life, startling her from her thoughts. She rushed to the radio, hoping to hear from her departing unit. Instead, a frantic voice filled the room, speaking in the local dialect. Sarah's blood ran cold as she recognized enough words to understand the meaning. Enemy forces were moving through the mountains, and they were heading directly for the outpost. Her hands moved quickly across the radio controls, trying to establish contact with her unit. Static filled the airwaves, punctuated by brief moments of clarity that revealed nothing but empty frequencies. The mountain terrain made communication difficult under the best circumstances, and now, when she needed it most, the radio seemed determined to fail her. Sarah's mind raced as she considered her options. The nearest friendly forces were hours away, possibly longer given the treacherous mountain roads. Her unit's convoy would be out of radio range by now, focused on reaching the main base before nightfall. She was alone, with limited ammunition and supplies, facing an unknown number of enemy fighters. The first sign of movement came from the eastern ridge, where sunlight glinted off metal. Sarah grabbed her binoculars and focused on the distant slope. What she saw made her stomach drop. Dozens of figures moved along the ridgeline, their weapons clearly visible even at this distance. They were positioning themselves for an attack, and she was their only target. Sarah's training kicked in automatically. She had spent years preparing for situations like this, though she never imagined facing them alone. Her first priority was to establish defensive positions and gather as much ammunition as possible. The base's armory contained enough weapons and supplies to last several days, assuming she could reach it safely. Moving quickly but quietly, Sarah began preparing the outpost for siege. She disabled the main gate mechanism, ensuring enemy forces couldn't simply drive through the entrance. Next, she gathered ammunition from various storage points, creating caches in strategic locations throughout the base. Her movements were efficient and purposeful, each action calculated to maximize her defensive capabilities. The base's layout worked in her favor. Built into the side of a hill, it offered natural protection from certain angles while providing clear fields of fire toward the most likely approach routes. Sarah had memorized every inch of the terrain during her months stationed here, knowledge that might now save her life. As she worked, Sarah thought about her family back home. Her younger brother had just started college, supported by the money she sent home each month. Her parents worried constantly about her deployment, calling whenever communication windows allowed. They would be devastated if something happened to her, but Sarah pushed those thoughts aside. Survival required focus, not emotional distractions. The enemy forces were moving closer now, their advance cautious but determined. Sarah counted at least 90 fighters spread across multiple approach routes. They had planned this attack carefully, timing it to coincide with the base evacuation. Someone had provided them with detailed intelligence about the withdrawal schedule, a troubling thought that she filed away for later consideration. Sarah positioned herself in the main defensive tower, a concrete structure that offered excellent visibility and protection. The tower's machine gun emplacement had been left behind during the evacuation, too heavy and cumbersome for the departing convoy. Now, that oversight might be her salvation. The weapon was an older model, reliable, but requiring manual operation. Sarah checked its mechanism carefully, ensuring proper function and adequate ammunition supply. She had trained extensively on similar weapons, but operating one alone under combat conditions would test every skill she possessed. As the afternoon sun began its descent toward the western peaks, Sarah spotted movement in the valley below. Small groups of enemy fighters were positioning themselves behind rocks and trees, preparing for a coordinated assault. Their tactics suggested military training and experience, not the random violence of untrained insurgents. The waiting was almost worse than the fighting would be. Sarah's mind created scenarios and contingencies, each more challenging than the last. She forced herself to focus on immediate concerns, checking and rechecking her equipment while maintaining watch on the approaching forces. The base's perimeter alarm system had been disabled before the evacuation, another security measure that now worked against her. Sarah would have to rely on her own eyes and ears to detect the enemy approach. The mountain environment carried sound in unexpected ways, making it difficult to determine exact positions or numbers. As shadows lengthened across the valley, Sarah made her final preparations. She had positioned ammunition strategically throughout the base, created multiple fallback positions, and identified potential escape routes if the situation became hopeless. Her survival training emphasized adaptability and resourcefulness, qualities she would need in abundance. The first shots came as twilight settled over the mountains, muzzle flashes blinking like deadly fireflies in the gathering darkness. Sarah's war had begun, and she was ready to make her stand against impossible odds. The next 8 hours would determine whether she lived to see another dawn or became another casualty of an endless conflict in this remote corner of the world. The first bullets struck the concrete walls with sharp cracks that echoed through the empty base. Sarah pressed herself against the tower's protective barrier, her heart pounding as reality set in. This was no longer a training exercise or theoretical scenario. Enemy forces were actively trying to kill her, and she was completely alone. Sarah peered around the corner of her defensive position, quickly identifying muzzle flashes in the darkness below. The enemy had spread out across a wide arc, making it difficult to target multiple positions simultaneously. Their tactics showed coordination and planning, suggesting this was not a random attack of opportunity. The machine gun's weight felt familiar in her hands as Sarah prepared to return fire. She had practiced this scenario countless times during training, but the simulation never included the crushing isolation of facing an entire enemy force without backup. Her breathing steadied as military discipline overcame natural fear. Her first burst was carefully aimed at a cluster of muzzle flashes near a large boulder. The tracer rounds illuminated the night sky like angry red stars, seeking their targets with deadly precision. Sarah's shots found their mark, and the return fire from that position ceased abruptly. One small victory in what promised to be a long battle. The enemy response was immediate and overwhelming. Dozens of rifles opened fire simultaneously, their bullets striking the tower and surrounding structures with metallic pings and concrete chips. Sarah ducked below the parapet, waiting for the initial barrage to subside before returning fire again. Communication remained her biggest challenge. The radio continued producing only static, leaving her completely cut off from friendly forces. Sarah realized that even if she survived this attack, no one would know about her situation for hours or possibly days. The thought was terrifying, but she pushed it aside to focus on immediate survival. Moving quickly between positions, Sarah began implementing the defensive strategy she had planned during the afternoon. The base's layout allowed her to create the illusion of multiple defenders by firing from different locations and then rapidly repositioning. This tactic might confuse the enemy about her actual numbers and capabilities. The tower's ammunition supply was substantial, but Sarah knew she needed to conserve rounds for the long battle ahead. Each burst was carefully aimed and limited to short, controlled fire. Accuracy mattered more than volume when facing such overwhelming numerical disadvantage. As the firefight continued, Sarah began to understand the enemy's approach pattern. They were advancing in stages, using covering fire to move closer to the base perimeter. Their coordination suggested military training and possibly combat experience. This was not a ragtag group of fighters, but a disciplined force with a specific mission. Between fire exchanges, Sarah heard voices calling out in the local dialect. She couldn't understand everything, but the tone suggested frustration and confusion. Her mobile defense was working, making it difficult for the attackers to pinpoint her exact position or determine how many defenders they faced. The base's fuel depot became a concern as stray bullets began striking nearby structures. Sarah realized that a single lucky shot could create a massive explosion, potentially destroying the entire outpost. She made a mental note to avoid that area unless absolutely necessary for defensive purposes. Enemy forces began probing the base's weaker positions, testing different approach routes to find vulnerabilities. Sarah responded by shifting her defensive focus, using the base's internal passages to move quickly between firing positions. Her months of familiarity with the layout provided a crucial advantage in the darkness. The attackers' frustration became apparent as their assault lost momentum. They had expected to overrun a lightly defended or abandoned position, not face determined resistance from an unknown number of defenders. Sarah's strategy of creating confusion about her actual situation was proving effective. Hours passed in a blur of muzzle flashes, concrete dust, and adrenaline. Sarah's training had prepared her for the physical demands of combat, but the mental strain of fighting alone was something no simulation could replicate. She forced herself to stay focused on immediate tactical decisions rather than the broader hopelessness of her situation. The enemy changed tactics around midnight, attempting to infiltrate the base through multiple points simultaneously. Sarah detected movement near the vehicle maintenance area and redirected her fire to counter this new threat. Her shots forced the infiltrators back, but she knew they would try again from different angles. Ammunition management became critical as the night wore on. Sarah had established supply caches throughout the base, but accessing them safely required careful timing and movement. She used lulls in enemy fire to resupply, always maintaining awareness of potential ambush points. The attackers tried psychological warfare, shouting threats and demands for surrender in broken English. Sarah ignored these attempts, focusing instead on maintaining her defensive positions and conserving resources. Surrendering was not an option, regardless of the odds against her. As dawn approached, Sarah realized the enemy was growing desperate. Their initial confidence had given way to frustration as their assault stalled against unexpected resistance. They had committed significant resources to this attack, expecting quick victory, but found themselves trapped in a prolonged siege. The base's water supply remained secure, giving Sarah a crucial advantage in any extended engagement. The attackers, positioned in exposed mountain terrain, would face increasing difficulties as time passed. Sarah's defensive position, while dangerous, offered better protection and resources than their external positions. Enemy fire patterns revealed fatigue and decreasing coordination as the night progressed. Some positions fell silent, whether from casualties or ammunition shortages, Sarah couldn't determine. Her own situation remained precarious, but the attackers were clearly struggling with their own challenges. Radio communications remained impossible, leaving Sarah completely isolated from any potential rescue or support. She accepted this reality and focused on what she could control, her immediate defensive capabilities and resource management. Survival depended on her own skills and determination, nothing else. The psychological impact of fighting alone against overwhelming odds tested every aspect of Sarah's mental preparation. She drew strength from her training, her sense of duty, and her determination to prove that abandoning this position had been premature. She would hold the line regardless of personal cost. As the first hints of dawn appeared on the eastern horizon, Sarah prepared for what might be the enemy's final assault. Dawn would reveal her true situation to the attackers, potentially ending any illusion about multiple defenders. The next few hours would determine whether her remarkable defense could continue or if her luck had finally run out. Dawn's early light revealed the true scope of Sarah's situation for the first time. From her position in the defensive tower, she could see enemy fighters scattered across the valley in positions that had been invisible during the darkness. The sight was both terrifying and strangely reassuring. She had survived the night against these odds, proving her defensive strategy could work even in daylight. The morning light also revealed the cost of the night's battle. Several enemy positions showed signs of successful hits from her defensive fire. Bodies lay motionless near the approaches to the base, evidence that her resistance had not been without effect. The sight brought no satisfaction, only grim recognition of the reality she faced. Sarah used the improved visibility to conduct a thorough assessment of her situation. Ammunition supplies remained adequate for continued defense, but not indefinitely. Water and food were sufficient for several more days, assuming she could maintain control of the base's central areas. Her biggest concern remained the complete lack of communication with friendly forces. The enemy seemed equally surprised by the daylight revelation. Through her binoculars, Sarah could see animated discussions among the attacking forces. They had clearly expected to find an abandoned base or minimal resistance, not a determined defense that had cost them casualties throughout the night. Around mid-morning, the attackers tried a different approach. A small group carrying a white cloth approached the base perimeter, apparently seeking to negotiate. Sarah watched them carefully but maintained her defensive position. In this remote region, trusting enemy overtures could be fatal, regardless of apparent peaceful intentions. The negotiation attempt was brief and unsuccessful. The enemy representatives shouted demands for surrender in broken English, promising safe passage if she laid down her weapons. Sarah's response was a carefully aimed shot that struck the ground near their feet, sending them scrambling back to their positions. There would be no surrender, no matter how hopeless the situation appeared. The failed negotiation seemed to anger the attackers, who resumed their assault with increased intensity. Daylight allowed them to coordinate more effectively, concentrating their fire on specific sections of the base. Sarah adapted by increasing her movement between positions, never staying in one location long enough for the enemy to target her effectively. Her strategy of creating confusion about defender numbers continued working even in daylight. By varying her firing positions and maintaining different types of suppressive fire, Sarah managed to keep the attackers uncertain about what they faced. This uncertainty prevented them from committing to an all-out assault that might overwhelm her defenses. The base's defensive advantages became clearer in daylight. Its position on elevated terrain provided excellent fields of fire while offering natural protection from most approach routes. The concrete construction offered substantial protection from small arms fire, though Sarah knew it wouldn't stop heavy weapons if the enemy possessed them. As the day progressed, Sarah noticed signs of disagreement among the attacking forces. Some groups seemed eager to continue the assault, while others appeared more cautious. This division worked in her favor, preventing coordinated attacks that might succeed where individual efforts had failed. The physical demands of sustained combat began taking their toll. Sarah had been fighting for nearly 12 hours with minimal rest, relying on adrenaline and training to maintain effectiveness. She forced herself to eat and drink regularly, knowing that physical collapse would end her defense more surely than enemy bullets. Around noon, the attackers attempted their most serious assault of the day. Multiple groups moved simultaneously toward different sections of the perimeter, supported by concentrated covering fire. Sarah responded by prioritizing the most dangerous threats, using her limited ammunition with calculated precision to break up the coordinated advance. The assault lasted nearly an hour before the attackers fell back to their previous positions. Sarah's defense had held, but the cost was significant. Her ammunition supplies were noticeably reduced, and several of her secondary positions had been compromised by enemy fire. The situation was becoming more precarious with each passing hour. During the lull following the failed assault, Sarah heard new sounds from the valley below. Vehicles were approaching from the north, their engines echoing off the mountain walls. Her heart raced as she considered possibilities. Were these reinforcements for the enemy, or could they be friendly forces finally responding to her situation? Through her binoculars, Sarah watched as 3 pickup trucks wound their way up the mountain road toward the base. The vehicles carried additional fighters, doubling the enemy force she faced. Her situation had just become significantly worse, but she remained determined to continue her defense regardless of the odds. The new arrivals brought fresh energy to the enemy assault. They also brought additional weapons, including what appeared to be a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. Sarah realized that her concrete protective positions might not be adequate against such weapons. She needed to adapt her defensive strategy quickly. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the exposed mountain terrain, creating new challenges for both sides. The attackers, positioned in minimal cover, suffered from heat and exposure. Sarah, while better protected within the base, faced her own challenges as metal surfaces became burning hot to touch. Enemy frustration reached new levels as the day wore on without significant progress. They had committed substantial resources to what should have been a simple operation, only to find themselves bogged down in an unexpected siege. Sarah's determined resistance was costing them time, resources, and casualties they hadn't anticipated. The psychological impact of her lone stand began affecting the attackers' morale. Fighting against unknown numbers of defenders was one thing, but the possibility that a single determined soldier was holding them off seemed to shake their confidence. Sarah could hear heated arguments among the enemy positions, suggesting growing disagreement about continuing the assault. As evening approached, Sarah prepared for another night of combat. Her ammunition situation was becoming critical, forcing her to be even more selective about targets. Each shot had to count, as there might not be enough bullets to waste on suppressive fire or uncertain targets. The enemy seemed to be preparing for a major night assault, possibly their final attempt to take the base before withdrawing. Sarah could see movement and preparation in multiple positions, suggesting a coordinated attack designed to overwhelm her remaining defenses through sheer numbers and determination. Radio communications remained impossible, leaving Sarah completely cut off from any hope of rescue or support. She had accepted this reality and focused entirely on her immediate defensive capabilities. If she was going to die in this remote mountain outpost, she would make the enemy pay dearly for their victory. The sun disappeared behind the western peaks, casting the valley into shadow once again. Sarah checked her remaining ammunition one final time and prepared for what might be her last stand. The enemy had numbers, fresh reinforcements, and heavier weapons. All she had was determination, training, and an absolute refusal to surrender the position she had defended for so long. The second night began with a ferocity that surpassed anything Sarah had experienced during the first 18 hours of combat. The reinforced enemy force launched simultaneous attacks from multiple directions, their muzzle flashes creating a deadly constellation across the darkened valley. The intensity of incoming fire forced Sarah deeper into the base's protective structures, abandoning some of her preferred defensive positions. The rocket-propelled grenade changed everything. The first shot struck the communications building, sending chunks of concrete and twisted metal flying through the night air. The explosion's shockwave knocked Sarah to the ground, temporarily stunning her as debris rained down around her position. When her hearing returned, she realized the attackers were systematically targeting the base's key structures. Sarah adapted quickly to this new threat, abandoning static positions in favor of constant movement. The base's internal corridor system allowed her to travel between defensive points while remaining protected from direct fire. Her intimate knowledge of the layout, gained through months of daily routine, now provided a crucial survival advantage. The enemy's strategy became clear as they used the grenade launcher to destroy specific buildings while infantry advanced under covering fire. They were methodically eliminating her defensive options, forcing her into increasingly limited areas. Sarah responded by making her movements unpredictable, striking from unexpected angles before quickly relocating. Ammunition conservation reached critical importance as the night progressed. Sarah had less than 200 rounds remaining for the machine gun, with only her personal rifle and sidearm as backup weapons. Each shot required careful consideration, balancing immediate tactical needs against the certainty that her supply was almost exhausted. The attackers' confidence grew as they observed the reduced defensive fire. They began taking greater risks, advancing closer to the base perimeter in small groups while others provided covering fire. Sarah used this aggressiveness against them, waiting until enemy fighters committed to exposed positions before engaging with precisely aimed shots. Around midnight, a new sound joined the cacophony of battle. Helicopter rotors echoed off the mountain walls, growing steadily louder as the aircraft approached from the south. Sarah's heart raced with hope that rescue might finally be arriving. But the sound could equally represent enemy reinforcements or evacuation. The helicopter passed overhead without landing, circling the area twice before disappearing back into the darkness. Sarah couldn't determine if the aircraft was friendly or hostile, but its presence suggested that someone was aware of the battle taking place. Whether that awareness would translate into assistance remained unknown. Enemy coordination began breaking down as fatigue and casualties mounted. Some groups continued pressing their attacks while others held back, creating gaps in their assault that Sarah exploited mercilessly. Her defensive fire focused on the most aggressive attackers, making them pay dearly for their boldness while discouraging others from similar risks. The base's fuel depot, which had concerned Sarah throughout the battle, finally became a tactical asset. She deliberately targeted an abandoned vehicle near the storage area, hoping to create a distraction. The resulting explosion illuminated the entire valley, revealing enemy positions while temporarily blinding the attackers with its brilliant flash. Using the confusion created by the explosion, Sarah launched her own counterattack. She moved aggressively through the base's outer perimeter, engaging enemy positions that had been invisible in the darkness. Her sudden offensive caught several groups by surprise, forcing them to retreat and regroup. The counterattack cost precious ammunition, but it achieved its psychological purpose. The enemy's confidence was shaken by this unexpected aggression from what they assumed was a depleted and desperate defender. Some groups began withdrawing to more distant positions, reducing the immediate pressure on the base perimeter. Sarah's physical condition was deteriorating rapidly after more than 24 hours of continuous combat. Dehydration, exhaustion, and stress were taking their toll despite her efforts to maintain peak performance. She forced herself to consume water and food regularly, knowing that physical collapse would end her defense more certainly than enemy bullets. The enemy's determination also showed signs of wavering. Their assault had cost significant casualties and resources while achieving minimal territorial gains. Arguments between different groups became audible even above the gunfire, suggesting growing disagreement about continuing the siege. Dawn's approach brought new urgency to both sides. The attackers seemed determined to achieve victory before daylight exposed their positions again, while Sarah prepared for what might be their final assault. Her ammunition was nearly exhausted, forcing her to rely primarily on her rifle and the psychological impact of her continued resistance. The pre-dawn assault began with everything the enemy had remaining. Rifle fire, grenade explosions, and rocket attacks created a devastating barrage that forced Sarah into the base's most protected areas. She could only respond with carefully aimed single shots, each one potentially her last opportunity to discourage the advancing attackers. As the first light of dawn appeared on the eastern horizon, Sarah found herself backed into the base's central command bunker with less than 30 rounds of ammunition remaining. The enemy had finally achieved numerical and firepower superiority that her tactical skills could no longer overcome. She prepared for a final stand, determined to make her remaining bullets count. The sound that changed everything came not from the valley below, but from the sky above. Multiple helicopters approached from different directions, their rotor noise building to a thunderous crescendo that echoed off the mountain walls. Sarah's heart leaped with desperate hope as she recognized the distinctive sound of military aircraft. The first helicopter appeared over the eastern ridge, followed quickly by two more from the north. Their markings were clearly visible in the growing daylight, identifying them as friendly forces responding to the battle. The cavalry had finally arrived, just as Sarah's own resources reached their absolute limit. The enemy's reaction to the helicopters was immediate and panicked. Fighters began abandoning their positions and fleeing toward prepared escape routes in the surrounding mountains. Their carefully planned assault collapsed into chaos as survival became more important than completing their mission. Sarah emerged from the command bunker as the helicopters circled the base, their door gunners engaging the fleeing attackers. The sight of reinforcements arriving at the critical moment felt surreal after 36 hours of believing she would die alone in this remote outpost. The first helicopter touched down in the base's central courtyard, disgorging a squad of heavily armed soldiers who immediately began securing the perimeter. Their leader, a Captain Sarah recognized from the main base, approached her position with obvious amazement at finding anyone alive. The nightmare was over. Sarah had held the line against impossible odds for 8 hours of desperate combat, proving that determination and skill could overcome numerical superiority. Her stand would become legendary. But, in that moment, she was simply grateful to see friendly faces and know that her long vigil was finally ended. Captain Rodriguez stared at Sarah in disbelief as she emerged from the command bunker, her uniform torn and blackened with smoke. But her rifle still held at the ready. The base around them showed the devastating effects of the prolonged battle, with damaged buildings and scattered debris telling the story of an incredible defense that no one had thought possible. The rescue force quickly established a defensive perimeter while medics rushed to evaluate Sarah's condition. She insisted she was fine, though exhaustion was evident in every movement. The adrenaline that had sustained her through 36 hours of combat was finally wearing off, leaving her physically and emotionally drained. Intelligence officers immediately began documenting the scene, photographing enemy casualties, and collecting weapons left behind during the chaotic retreat. The evidence painted a clear picture of a massive assault that had been repelled by a single defender against overwhelming odds. The implications were staggering from both tactical and morale perspectives. Sarah's first priority was establishing communication with higher command to report the situation and ensure no other isolated positions faced similar threats. The radio equipment, damaged during the enemy's rocket attacks, required field repairs before reliable communication could be reestablished. Until then, the rescue helicopters served as their link to the outside world. The base's condition shocked the rescue team members who had served there previously. Buildings they remembered as solid structures now showed massive damage from explosions and sustained gunfire. The defensive positions Sarah had used were scarred with bullet impacts, testament to the intensity of fire she had endured throughout the siege. Casualty assessment revealed the true cost of the enemy's failed assault. Over 20 attackers had been killed or wounded during the siege, an extraordinary number for a single defender to achieve. The psychological impact on the surviving enemy forces would likely discourage similar attacks on isolated positions in the future. Sarah's ammunition expenditure told its own story of careful resource management under extreme pressure. She had fired nearly 800 rounds during the siege, maintaining accuracy and effectiveness despite fatigue, stress, and overwhelming enemy pressure. Every shot had been deliberate and purposeful, maximizing the impact of her limited resources. The enemy's escape routes showed evidence of panicked retreat once the helicopters arrived. Equipment and weapons were scattered along mountain trails, abandoned by fighters more concerned with survival than tactical withdrawal. Some wounded attackers were found and taken into custody, providing valuable intelligence about the assault's planning and objectives. Command's initial reaction to Sarah's situation was a mixture of amazement and concern. No one had considered the possibility that the base evacuation might leave personnel behind, and the communication breakdown that prevented rescue coordination for so long demanded immediate investigation and procedural review. Medical evaluation revealed the physical toll of Sarah's ordeal. Dehydration, exhaustion, and minor injuries from flying debris were her primary health concerns. More significantly, the psychological impact of 36 hours of solo combat would require careful monitoring and possible counseling to prevent long-term effects. The media attention surrounding Sarah's stand began almost immediately as news of the incident spread through military channels. The story of a single soldier holding off nearly 100 attackers captured public imagination and provided a powerful example of military dedication and courage under impossible circumstances. Sarah's family received notification of her survival before news reports could reach them, preventing the trauma of learning about her situation through public media. Their relief and pride were overwhelming, though they struggled to comprehend the magnitude of what she had accomplished during those desperate hours. The base itself became a subject of intense strategic review. Its abandonment had clearly been premature, given the enemy's immediate attempt to occupy the position. The intelligence failure that allowed such a large force to approach undetected demanded thorough investigation and systemic improvements. Sarah's tactical decisions during the siege were analyzed extensively by military strategists seeking lessons that could be applied to similar situations. Her use of mobility, deception, and psychological warfare while managing limited resources provided valuable insights into defensive tactics under extreme disadvantage. The enemy's assault plan, reconstructed from evidence and prisoner interrogations, revealed sophisticated intelligence gathering and coordination. They had known about the evacuation schedule and planned their attack to coincide with the base's abandonment, suggesting security breaches that required immediate attention. Recognition for Sarah's extraordinary performance came swiftly through official channels. Her actions exceeded every standard for heroism under fire, earning nominations for the highest military decorations available. More importantly, her example inspired other soldiers facing difficult situations in remote postings. The psychological impact of her resistance extended beyond immediate tactical concerns. Enemy forces in the region would now face the knowledge that isolated military positions might be defended with unexpected determination and effectiveness. This uncertainty could significantly impact their future operational planning. Sarah's return to normal duty required careful transition and ongoing support. The intensity of her combat experience created challenges in adapting to routine military operations after proving herself capable of extraordinary performance under the most extreme circumstances imaginable. Months later, Sarah stood before a crowd of military personnel and civilian officials as medals were pinned to her uniform. The ceremony honored not just her individual courage, but the principles of duty and determination that every soldier aspired to embody. Her story had become legend, but she remained focused on the simple truth that she had done her job when circumstances demanded everything she could give. The abandoned base was eventually reoccupied and strengthened, serving as a memorial to the extraordinary defense that had taken place there. A plaque commemorated the 8 hours when one soldier held the line against impossible odds, proving that courage and determination could triumph over numerical superiority. Sarah's legacy extended far beyond her individual actions that day. Her stand demonstrated that every soldier, regardless of rank or position, possessed the potential for extraordinary heroism when circumstances demanded ultimate sacrifice. She had been abandoned on a remote base, faced overwhelming odds alone, and emerged victorious through sheer force of will. The story concluded not with victory parades or public celebrations, but with Sarah's return to duty, carrying the quiet satisfaction of having proven that some lines cannot be crossed regardless of the odds. She had held her position, protected her post, and upheld the highest traditions of military service when it mattered most. In the end, Sarah's remarkable 8-hour stand against 92 attackers became more than just a tactical victory. It became proof that individual courage, properly applied, could overcome seemingly impossible odds and inspire others to similar heights of dedication and sacrifice.